So I'm very excited to introduce the moderator for this panel, Kim Moore-Bailey. Kim, as she always does, is wearing many hats as she's here at the conference. She's the chair of the board of the Children in Nature Network, and we really appreciate her service on the board. She's also on the board of the Blue Sky Funders Forum, and you may know we've got many folks from Blue Sky Funders Forum that's meeting next door this week as well. And Kim also serves, and she serves on many other boards as well, but those are two I'll mention. She's also the president and CEO of Justice Outside, which is an incredible organization based out of Oakland that's really working to advance racial equity and justice in the outdoor and nature connection movement. So, you know, please join me in welcoming Kim. She's really one of the most thoughtful, brilliant, and creative leaders I've ever worked with. So welcome, Kim.
Good morning. And thank you, Sarah, so much for the kind introduction. Yes, I do wear many hats, and I am truly honored to be able to do that. I also would just want to take a moment and recognize the other Children in Nature Network board members that are here. If you all could raise your hands so that folks could see who's helping move the work forward. On behalf of the board, I really want to welcome you all here today to the conference, much like everyone else has. It's truly a joy to see you, and for those of you joining us virtually, thank you as well for Zooming in. I also want to take a moment and thank the Children in Nature Network staff. Okay, if all of you could raise your hands collectively. It's a heavy lift to organize one conference. They're organizing two, been supporting those of us that are here in person, as well as those of us that are joining us virtually. So thank you so much to the team for everything that you're doing to make these next couple of days amazing. You know, something that makes the Children in Nature Network movement unique is how people come together across a wide range of disciplines and approaches. And at the end of the day, it's because we all care so deeply about the health and well-being of children and our natural world. In today's opening panel, we will hear from 4 incredible leaders of large, successful movements. And as they're speaking with us, I encourage us all to think about how these movements or themes within them connect and intersect with our own, and about how to apply what we learn to advance our work to increase equitable access to nature. Our panel will focus on 5 essential components of movement building: people, causes, engagement, innovation and technology, and awareness. So now I'd like to introduce our outstanding panel. You'll find their full bios online, but I'm just going to share a little bit about each one of them. First, Dr. Robert Blaine. He's a senior executive and director of the National League of Cities Institute for Youth, Education, and Families. Dr. Blaine will share lessons learned from the Institute's 22-year history of galvanizing city leaders' attention around uplifting children, youth, and families, and a growing movement of city leaders who are tapping into nature connection strategies to address a wide range of issues, from climate resilience to public health to school readiness. Dr. Blaine has a deep understanding of how cities work, having served as the former Chief Administrative Officer for the city of Jackson, Mississippi. Next is Tia Karut. Tia is the founder of the Atlanta chapter of Earth Guardians, an organization working to give youth around the world a voice and direction for communities. An American Lebanese student entering Mercer University's School of Pharmacy in this coming fall, Tia calls herself an activist for many causes. She's an advocate for climate and environmental action, water and land rights, especially on Native American land, combating racism and discrimination, spiritual, mental, and physical health, as well as human, indigenous, Arab, and social justice activism. Next, I think my mic is going in and out. Is that right? Okay, it's back. Thank you. Next is Richard Carlblum. He's the co-founder and partner of the United Strategies, a national advocacy firm specializing in federal, state, and local government relations, fundraising, coalition building, grasstops advocacy, and campaign management. Richard is recognized globally as a leading strategist in the National Freedom to Marry movement. He led one of the first Vote No campaigns that helped Minnesota become the first state in the U.S. to defeat a constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage. And finally, but definitely not least, the Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley. He is a legendary leader of civil rights causes and an active environmental warrior. He is a pastor emeritus of the historic Providence Missionary Baptist Church of Atlanta. He also joined the civil rights movement in 1960 while attending Tennessee State University in Nashville. Upon graduation, he volunteered as one of the first U.S. Peace Corps members to serve in Nigeria. He served as vice president of the Institute for Services to Education, designing interdisciplinary study programs for historically Black colleges and universities, and later earned a doctorate in urban education and psychology at the University of Massachusetts. Understanding that the mind and the spirit must be in harmony, he then earned a Master's of Divinity degree at Howard University. He believes that we have a moral obligation and civic responsibility to speak up about climate change, global warming, and environmental justice. Incredible panel, right? So the plan today is for us to talk for roughly 45 minutes. And on your tables, you'll see cards. And after we have sort of the formal panel discussion, we also want to entertain some questions from all of you. So as we're speaking, or even if you have a question now, feel free to jot that down. Staff will be around throughout the morning to collect those from you. But before we begin the panel, sorry, I know everybody wants to hear from the panel. We just learned that one of our panelists has a very special birthday tomorrow. The Reverend Dr. Durley is turning 80. And I'm hoping you'll join me in just a quick rendition of Happy Birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Reverend Dr. Durley. Happy day to you.
How old are you? How old are you? Tomorrow I'll be 80 years old.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so we're going to jump into some questions, and we have used those 5 areas of focus to help frame the questions. So the first question, I'm going to ask Tia to start us off, but all of the panelists are welcome to join, and it is under the people category, about enhancing and appreciating the role of the people in a movement. So Tia, every movement is composed of leaders and followers. How did you care for the people that helped you build power?
Well, first of all, I like to say that I engaged people through different social media platforms, and I had personal conversations with multiple people. So I was able to connect with them on a very personal level. I was also able to spread my knowledge and share posts and inform people on different issues, which really got people engaged. And that further was the catalyst for people asking questions constantly and people getting engaged in issues that they never really previously heard of. And I also think it's very important to build connections with different people of different ages and backgrounds so that the message can be spread further.
Wonderful, thank you. Does anybody else want to add how they've engaged people in their movements? Or how you've supported them and helped them build power?
I'll just talk about that from the aspect of working in a city, which is really, so I was working in the city of Jackson, Mississippi, and our mayor, Chokwe Lumumba, was focused on what he called people power, right? And so how does power actually flow from people in order to be able to influence what government does? And many leaders, some leaders, I'll say, are hesitant to give away power. And I think the real power in movement building is being able to move power from the leadership structure to a shared governance, a shared power. And so what was really interesting was that one example of that was a process of participatory budgeting that we did. And in many cities, when you do participatory budgeting, you give one little piece of the budget, a couple $1 million, and give people the opportunity to think about what they can do with that. What we did was we took the entire city budget, and we actually created a board game, and we took it all around the city to community meetings. And the board game had all the issues from the past year, everything that happened during that year. And you played the game, and you had, $500 million to play around with. And then after all of the issues, the water main broke on First Street, and then something happened in the school district, and something happened over here, you had a little bit of money left over, and you had to start determining what your priorities were. What was really amazing about that was that people in the community really saw that, that they could actually influence the way government made decisions. And what was really exciting was that people would come to me afterwards and they were like, you know what, you need to raise taxes. We don't have enough money for that playground over there, And so it was really exciting. And I thought that was a great example of how shared power is a way of really giving people the ownership of what it means to be able to control their own lives.
And in many ways, caring about them, caring about what they think, caring about what their contributions are going to be. Yes. Richard, were you going to add?
Yeah, I was also going to say, in a volunteer-led organization, one of the things that we practiced quite a bit was this idea of radical hospitality, where you greet people and you make sure that they feel appreciated every time they walk in the door or every time they engage in the effort itself. You find little unique ways to celebrate their participation so that they know that whether they spend 5 minutes on your cause or they spend 3 years on your cause, they feel a deep sense of gratitude. And we find that deepens their engagement over time. We feel like they're more likely to show up on the next volunteer shift or at the next action as well.
I would only have to say ditto to everything that they've said. It would be redundant because it's so important that people feel good about who they are and what they do.
And if I could share a little bit of what I overheard, you also talked about humor as a way of caring.
Yeah, I
for
think it's
people.
very important because we live in a world that's so tight today. From young children, they're tight, and not just the pandemic, but the kind of vicissitudes that they face each day. So I think a little levity. And when people can come in, particularly those from the community, because we have a sense of privilege mentality when we bring people in to see them less than. But if they can understand that we're all, it's an even, equal road that we're on, and have a little levity. Every now and then tell a joke. Every now and then let some humor flow, because we live in such a tight world, and medicine can't get rid of that tightness. We have to understand that the appreciation, as Richard was saying and others were saying, the appreciation of what you do. I think one of the greatest compliments anyone can give is that to another person is, you make me feel good about myself when I'm with you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. So thinking about causes, how the cause can help actually build the power? And Richard, I'll ask you to answer first for us, and then of course everyone else is invited to contribute. What happens if people in a community aren't excited or don't see the urgency or the value of your cause or of our cause?
Well, and that happens. It can be incredibly frustrating, and I've been there before. So my first advice is to understand that you don't need everyone in the community to walk in the door the first day. But what you should do is think about who you can build relationships with. In a lot of spaces, we call this relational organizing or deeply relational organizing. The ability of reaching out and identifying a small group of individuals who are interested just a little bit in your cause, and then you go about educating them, and you make sure that they understand the connection that your cause has to the many issues in the community that people care about. We talk a lot about intersectionality today. In Minnesota, we talk a lot about inequality. And there's an opportunity, I think, to develop that relationship with folks. And when you're in relation to somebody else and you're able to connect your issue to the causes that they are motivated to work on, and they see now the connection that you can present to them in attaining achievable progress, not only on your issue, but also on their cause, I think you can actually grow your network from there to get more people in the community on board.
Thank you. Yes, yes.
I think it's very important to also understand that there's going to be people from different backgrounds and have different stories and come from different places with different knowledge. So engaging in a diverse group of people is extremely important to get different perspectives and to further use that to build awareness and to really build the power in a movement.
Well, I would just add that one of my mentors once said, for a long time, we worked hard to make sure that there were people that looked like us in power. And now we need to make sure that there are people that think like us in power.
Yeah, I was going to say that the involvement of people, everything starts with a thought. Before I could say a word today, I had to think about it. Before any of our panelists could say something, it starts with a thought. And our thought becomes our words. And our words become our behavior becomes our values, and our values become our destiny. And when we're working with somebody, they have to understand what is the destiny, what is the overall goal, and it starts with a thought. So we've got to get into their heads that this is something that you want to go toward, not for me, but for you. And once the thinking goes, then they ask the question, how can I become a part of what you're doing?
Beautiful. Thank you.
Starts with a thought.
I want to shift to engagement now.
Oh.
And how we engage current and future stakeholders and how that can really define a movement.
I think that that's very important, and I think it's interesting that I was in with the thought concept. In 1959, when we started with the civil rights movement, Andy and John and Martin and all of us, it was a thinking that many people did not understand exactly what a movement was. It had been many efforts that had been going on for some time over the years, but this time we felt that it was a time to really get involved. And we began to think about it. So I think that whenever you put together a movement, people have to understand, how does this directly impact my life and the lives of those around me? As a student in 1959 at Tennessee State, I was concerned about being a basketball player and going out and making some money, not about anything about civil and human rights, and because I understood that we already lived in a world of institutionalized racism, so why should I squander my life getting involved with that? But then I began to listen to people, and I began to connect the dots to understand that the movement was larger than myself, that the movement was about how do we come together for the overall changing of an institutional system that was destroying all of us. So to get people engaged, the first thing they've got to do is understand how it directly impacts their lives. Right now in the environmental movement, all of the data and the statistics demonstrate what the environmental movement is about. But until it comes down to asthma, till it comes down to polluted air, till it comes down to water that's deteriorating, and forest fires, it doesn't make much sense. It's a lot of dialogue. So the engagement is that when it becomes an issue in the individual lives, then how my life connects with your life and how our lives connect together for a common good and a common cause. And then that thinking process begins to go. And then the question, you know that you have a person getting ready to get involved when they say, what is it that I can do where do you want me to go? If they don't ask that question, they're just kind of coming along and there. But when they say, what do you want me to do? And then give them something of responsibility. Give them a responsibility. And then the key is something that someone said earlier. Once you give them the responsibility, then praise them. Gangs exist because they praise each other. When you give a kid something, go off and do something, then praise that kid when they come back and they'll do more. So continuously praising those that are involved in the engagement process. Even praise a mistake.
Right.
Praise a mistake.
Can
Say,
learn from that.
that's great. You won't do that again, will you? So engagement, you praise them, and then the more you praise, the more, then the next thing you know, you've got them engaged in what it is that they want to do.
Perfect, yes. Does anybody else want to add any unique engagement strategies that you've used to have folks join your movement?
In my movement of Earth Guardians, it is international, and we've used different strategies, especially with the recent pandemic. We've had to kind of shift our gear online, but we've also used different strategies such as e-activism, which is solely based on social media, as well as having different demonstrations and protests at the legislative buildings regarding climate justice and environmental activism, as well as having different meetings, both online and in person.
Well, I always hesitate to follow behind Dr. Durley, but one of the, and he said this actually, one of the things that we used to say was that you always have to find the WIFM. And WIFM is an acronym that stands for What's in It for Me.
Right.
And if people understand, if you can understand what the WIFM is, then the goal is to be able to try and motivate the silent majority. There's a majority, usually there's a majority of people that simply don't say anything or they're inactive. And so how do you activate that silent majority? And it's leaders like the folks that are at this panel that have been able, that have had a history of being able to motivate that silent majority and find the WIFM for all of their communities.
I would say that my thought is very similar to that, which is we have a saying of meet them where they're at. So don't assume that somebody's just going to come to you prepared, but understand that everybody comes to the issue or cause with a different skill set, a different background, a different education, different ability, and your organization should try and value wherever people are coming from, make sure that you meet them where they're at, and then ask them how they want to make an impact in their best way possible.
And that's a real challenge because oftentimes you've got to sublimate your own particular feelings and desires and own privileged attitudes. And I think that that's one of the reasons that now, even though we're facing so much racism and sexism in the country, is that people have their own little bailiwick. And until they begin to sublimate those feelings and respect you where you really are, then there can be the kind of not only equality, but the kind of equity that is so essential. We thought we were fighting for parity and equality, and we were missing the boat. We should have been fighting for equity because the laws were changing all around us all of the time. So if we understand that in engaging people, then I think we've got a good shot at building the kind of network that's so essential to bring about the desired results.
You know, there's often the perception that like movement building started overnight.
No.
The engagement, you know, all of a sudden it was an idea and now there's people everywhere that want to be a part of it. So many of you have actually been at the beginning. What is that arc of engagement? How long does it actually sort of take before you feel that you've got the momentum and those that are excited about your work truly engaged?
I think the strength has to be we realize that we have to stay on the path of re-engagement because you can get people, there are people in the, as I look around particularly in the conservation and environmental movement, some of them, I go to meetings and I look up and I see people 60, 70, been in it for 30 and 40 years, and they're still trying to clean up a river with the river keepers, and sometimes they're just worn out. So we've got to understand now how to re-engage people. And I think one of the key things for re-engaging people and engaging people is a simple word called enthusiasm. I'm sick of tired, dead dried up people telling me about the environment. I need some people who are excited about bees being lost, that winds being thrown. I need some excitement in the movement. There's nothing worse than a dead movement. Excitement. I mean, we're in competition with the Atlanta Housewives on TV right now. So you've got to be excited about what you're doing, and excitement is contagious. So that's re-engaging people. I'm seeing people more excited about what we used, not what you used to do. What are you going to do now, and where are you going in the future?
Yes. You know, Tia has talked about technology, if I can move us on, and some of the new tools that clearly exist to help build power. Dr. Blaine, if I could ask you to start with this question: how do we ensure that new technology doesn't unknowingly create barriers for the people in our movement?
It's a great question. So one of the things that we've been doing at the National League of Cities is trying to essentially map inequity. What does it actually look like? And the data of inequity, we've been trying to disaggregate down to the census tract level in every single city, town, and village in the country. And so what that means is that you're able to have a set of indicators across the community that you can measure census tract by census tract. And the goal is that we're using that to drive policy that's focused on changing policy in a way that creates more equitable policy, more equitable programs, and creates more equitable outcomes for communities. The challenge is that if you only use data, if it's only quantitative and you don't pull in the qualitative part of understanding a community and understanding what the historical challenges have been, you can actually start marching down a really wrong path. And so bringing together this quantitative and qualitative process to be able to understand what the challenges are, but then to really bring the community together around holistic solutions that are really focused on what we talk about is 3 levels, right? So what happens at a programmatic level? What are we doing as a program in order to be able to try and change inequities? And how do we measure that? What happens at a systems level? So how are we systemically mapping where inequities are, and how are we changing the systems so that they're inherently more equitable? And then what happens at the population level? What does it mean for the lived existence of people in those communities? And so if we can think on those 3 levels and really focus on programs that are bringing together the community around that vision, our goal is that we can create communities where place-based inequity is not in existence.
Fantastic. Tia, do you want to add anything about technology and how we don't allow it to create barriers, right?
So for Earth Guardians, it is largely based online. So there have been some barriers and communication breakdowns, unfortunately. And we've had some chapters that solely focus on just using social media, which is not exactly the way to go. We have to continue to encourage people to also participate in real life and to make a difference in their communities, and realize that not everyone has the same level of access to the internet. So by using that, we can drive our movement further and continue making change.
I would say that as a movement or as an organization, you want to make sure that you diversify who is operating this technology and these platforms, because for example, you know, I know how to do a post on Facebook, but if you asked me to do a TikTok, I'd be dumbfounded. And so it's important to bring young people in who understand naturally that platform and how that platform does connect with their own community, with their own generation. Conversely, this last week when news broke, we asked folks if they wanted to respond to breaking news by writing postcards. And we weren't sure how many postcards would be requested, but we sent an email to 28,000 people, and 40,000 postcards were requested to be written on that topic. And so you know that sometimes when you give people the analog choice, they want to be able to put pen to paper and reach out to fellow voters to express their feelings. And other times, I need to rely on other people to do my TikToks.
Yeah, as you know, Kim, I chair the Interfaith Power and Light Board. We're in 40 states, 22,000 houses of worship, Buddhists, Shiites, Muslims. And one of the things that I've tried to say when you talk about technology is created to communicate. And the strength of communication is predicated, I think, upon three primary principles. And if we understand that whether we use the analog or whether we use the technology or what form, we're trying to communicate our message across 22,000 congregations, mosques, and synagogues, and all this. And the primary principles are, the first thing is in our communication, do we understand each other? First principle. Second, do we respect each other? Third, do we trust? Where there's no understanding, trust, nor understanding, there's no communication, and you can throw your technology out the window. So whatever we're doing in our technology or whatever it is, let us understand each other, respect our differences, and then trust each other in moving the overall together to move ahead. The communication is primary in using technology or whatever skill. I know when living in Nigeria, they used talking drums to communicate. That was the technology. And different communities use different things to communicate. Sometimes there are somebody that you didn't think in that community was the leader, and he or she would just be sitting in a back room someplace, but they could get out the message so fast. In other cases, it's using, now I'm not familiar with TikTok, but they're using the TikTok. So it depends on but the key for any of that technology is to communicate.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'm just going to pause here and remind folks to put your questions down on the postcards that are in the tables. Staff are wandering around to pick them up, so please just raise it up if you've got a question so that we can begin bringing them forward. The last area is awareness, right? Movements that sustain awareness, as you were saying, sort of the re-energizing, can grow in power, right? And I'll let anybody answer this one here. How did you sustain a presence in your community and not simply become just another issue or nonprofit initiative for people to support? So how do you stay top of mind for decision makers, for folks that are allocating budgets? How do you keep that awareness front and center?
For me, I kept my awareness by intertwining different disciplines. Being a pharmacy student, I used mental, physical, and spiritual health, intertwining that with climate justice and activism to spread awareness. Because oftentimes nowadays we see people rely a lot on prescription medication. And through my work as a future pharmacist, I want to inform people that nature is the best medicine, as common as that sounds, and that there are different methods we can use to heal people and to bring cureness to different diseases and conditions that people may have.
Henry?
I think in order to maintain awareness at times, I've seen organizations use unexpected messengers. So, think about, in terms of electoral success and access to the ballot box, there are certain voices that traditionally don't stand up for that access, and we would go out, create a relationship, and encourage them to speak out and speak loud. And just one voice that is unexpected can kind of open the eyes and the minds of so many other people.
I guess one of the principles that we've talked about as far as awareness is what we've called radical inclusion, and really thinking about how do we seek out the voices of those that have been voiceless in the process, and trying to use that, to leverage that as a way to create greater awareness about the whole community as opposed to awareness from a segment. And often that segment is a voice of privilege. And so how do we move away from that?
I like the term that you used, radical inclusion. I'll never forget right after the George Floyd incidents, and I think it gives me hope now, after all of these years in different movements, when I saw we met with the Black Lives Matter people here at a place called the Gathering Spot here in Atlanta, and 30 or 40 of them came together. And George, you know where the Gathering Spot is, and we met, and it was myself and several people over 50. We met with them, and we simply asked them, talking about awareness and getting your thoughts together, what do you all want? You're out here in the streets doing this. You want the change to come about. What do you want? And one of them said, we want the same thing you all had in the 60s. And I said in a very kind way, that's dumb. You can't have what we had in the 60s because this is 2021. And it's a difference. Had we gotten out in the streets, we'd have been beaten by the police. They let you do this and that. So it's a difference, a time. You've got to be aware that this is a different time and a different moment. I asked, who do you want to hear you? They said, anybody that will listen. I said, anyone would listen to you. You can't hold them accountable until you know who you want to speak to, what you want, and how to get it. So it's taking the old and working along with the new to bring an awareness to accomplish the particular goals that we see. And the reason I was so hopeful is that I saw different races, different colors, ages, and different sexual orientations coming together with a desire and a hope. It's just a matter of to bring awareness, how do we channel that? You can take water and bring it into a village and they'll call it a flood. Put gates around it and send the same water down there and they'll call it irrigation. So the awareness is, how do we irrigate our young people to continue the movement?
Wonderful, yes. Yeah. You know, in thinking about awareness, sometimes good news from a movement doesn't always capture the attention of local media, right? They want to talk about the bad news. So what kind of team or who did you tap, or what technology did you use in order to help capture the attention and actually share the good news?
For my movement, Earth Guardians, and for what I do with my activism work, I did solely rely on Instagram mostly, simply because it does provide a very easy and well-informed platform to spread the message on a very global level to people from all across the world. We also do have a website, www.earthguardians.org, which does also provide different links to the different social media platforms, and each chapter has several social media accounts.
Tia, can you share an example of maybe some good news that Earth Guardians recently spread to your network and beyond?
Recently, in the past few years, Earth Guardians has influenced legislators, and we have had very influential speakers and leaders lead our movement, and they have influenced different policymakers, especially out west, like in states like Colorado, to change different laws to improve climate justice and environmental work.
Fantastic. Anybody else? Good news?
Well, really quickly, one of the big challenges, at least running a city, is trying to combat unproductive historical narratives that are sensationalized in communities. And so one of the mechanisms that we had in the city of Jackson was something that we called people's assemblies, which was simply bringing people together around a common goal and giving them the power to be able to speak for themselves instead of being spoken for. And it was a really powerful tool, because when people had the opportunity to have their own voice and to speak about their own communities aspirationally and in a way that was positive, as opposed to being talked about. And it was the change in being able to speak for themselves rather than being spoken for.
Wonderful.
That's why I hate to follow you. Unfortunately, you're right. Bad news brings the press. And so we call it a soundbite. If we know that we're going to have something and we know that we have a positive message to give, we want to bring people together, and we say we're going to have a kumbaya meeting where people are going to come and we're going to have prayer, we're going to light candles, maybe one channel will show up. But if we said we're going to be out there and we're going to turn it around. They'll show up. Then we flip the script on them. So understanding how media works, then you put your sound bite out there, and then when they come, then you flip the script to get your converts, so to speak, involved. That's what we do, because we'll spend 20 minutes trying to figure out what will get the press there to get our message out. Right. And we know that if we're talking about we're going to have feeding the homeless, clothing, work with teenage pregnant mothers, or whatever it might be, they're not going to show. But if we can just put a tiny bit of controversy, they will be there, and then we can say, now, and then they'll see something, then they've got to then we can hold them accountable. Did they give the real story that we were portraying for our meeting and our rally for that day?
Excellent.
I'd also say that developing relationships with people who you want to cover your cause or your issue is really important. There are a lot of different things that reporters can provide attention to throughout the week. And when you're in a relationship with that reporter, when that relational organizing I talked about earlier, you can help them understand why it's so important for coverage for your cause to show up on their outlet.
Absolutely. Relationship building is at the core, right, of so many things. Well, thank you for answering the formal questions. Now we've got some questions from the audience. Sometimes movements are only seen for their charismatic leaders or their lack of leaders, like an organization. But rather than being leaderless, they're actually leaderful. How do you see leadership within movements?
It's interesting, going back to the analogy, the person that I was talking with the Black Lives Matter people, I asked the question, well, who is your leader? We don't have a leader, we're all leaders. Who is your spokesman? Well, all of us speak. I said, that's why you're not getting what you want to get right now. Dr. King was a chosen leader among the group. There were many differences between he and Hosea and other people, but when it came to speak, he was the spokesman. So you have a leader that emerges from the group that will articulate the values of what we're all talking about, so we can move ahead with one voice rather than coming from many different positions. So I think that leader, and particularly if you're organizing and you're watching the young men or the young women in the group, which one demonstrates that they can concretize a body of knowledge so that it can be forceful when they're getting ready to make a point. So I think that the leader, though, if you're organized, to find which ones are making certain kinds of statements, which ones can bring the group together and synthesize what's being said and articulate that, then others will say, that's what we mean. I see what you're saying now. And I think you use the term, and it doesn't have to be a charismatic leader. It doesn't have, a charismatic leader, they can get up and articulate it a lot and say it, but what are they saying? So you got to have the charisma along with the information that's being articulated. And it's finding that person. And then the others will say, okay, we trust you enough now to go ahead and speak on behalf of what we're saying. But the leader might be somebody that says nothing, but they're manipulating things behind the scenes and making it happen. So many times, these are the people we have to find. Who are those that are behind the scenes actually putting together what is happening? And then others might get out and say it.
Any other thoughts about how we see leadership in movements?
I would just add that I think the baseline of leadership comes from a shared set of values. And when organizations have a common set of values, it allows them to be able to speak with one voice. And to me, that's the birth of leadership, right? It doesn't really matter who's standing in front. As was earlier stated, it matters how we're coming together. And so at least the way that I try and work and to partner is to be able to start with that one central place. What do we value? And then how do we work together in order to be able to get that? And then we share, what does that shared leadership look like?
Wonderful.
And a lot of people think that they're a leader, but if you're a leader and nobody's following you, you're just walking in the park.
Okay, from Elliot, who is with Youth in Action. How have you or could you integrate authentic youth leadership into all aspects of your work in true decision-making and execution power?
I guess I'll jump into that one since we're the Institute for Youth Education and Families. So one of the things that we're really focused on is this principle of authentic engagement. And we have, so the way that our institute works, we actually have a Youth Education and Families Council. And it has historically consisted of city leadership from across the country and a set of youth that were there. However, it was fundamentally inequitable in that the city leaders had staffs, they had folks that were bringing their awareness on issues. They had a network, a support system underneath them, and the youth just showed up, right? And so, so we're actually building what we've called a advisory group for the Institute, which are all staffed positions. Youth, there are philanthropic leaders, there are academic leaders, as well as city officials. Everyone has the same voice in the process. They're all equal votes across the process. And what we're trying to build is an infrastructure where the voices of young people have a sense of equity in the governance of the organization. So it's trying to build the infrastructure that's needed in order to be able to support authentic youth voice.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Authentic youth engagement? No? It's an area we need to lean into?
I think what he said is really important.
he
I mean, what I thought about is empower and then fund them.
Right.
Don't expect them to do it for free. A lot of times kids who are showing up are disadvantaged, and you got to make sure that you fund them.
Wonderful, yes. Compensate folks for their time. Looking back on your career so far, Dwayne wants to know, what one thing would you have done differently and why?
I don't know if you could summarize it with one thing I would have done differently. I would have done a litany of things a lot differently. But I think if you have a certain something in your life where you're trying to make a difference and you're open to different ways in your behaviors changing, I never thought that I would be in the environmental movement. That was the most foreign element in my life. Mine was always civil and human rights. I could have personally cared less what happened to a polar bear or a tree or the oxygen. I just didn't know. I was ignorant, not stupid, but I just didn't know until someone began to tell me about it. And so I learned to really to listen, and I think one of the things that I would have changed, done differently, is to, as I've gone along, to listen to some people here, to listen to some people there, and it might have changed me in different ways. I was always kind of open and going with the flow. I had no idea about which direction I would go, but I think the key is being open to a direction that has a positive flow that can direct me into something that will reach the overall, what one wants to accomplish, and that is lifting somebody up. Mama used to say, down not those who are down, cheer them up in their sorrow. For this old world is a funny old world, and you may be down tomorrow. So if you use that, and it's going in a certain direction, so to change your life is, am I open to something that would lead me in a different direction? Did I make a mistake along the way a lot? Yes, but every time I made a mistake, it was a blessing to lead me to go down another path. So I think that, so it's just not one thing I would have done differently. I'd have done a lot of things differently, but the one thing I would always do is that try to be open to change.
Absolutely. And had somebody told you how that polar bear did impact you,
Yeah.
right, then the narrative for you would have perhaps been heard differently. Anybody else?
I would say that early in my career, I worked feverishly, worked really hard, and I would have benefited from someone pulling me aside and teaching me how to work smart rather than work hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad used to say, how many hours are you working? You know, you're lowering your hourly rate every time you stay beyond what they're actually paying you for. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you.
I think about mostly it's my interaction with people. When you're leading organizations, it's really, my biggest lesson early on was just dealing with people is always going to be one of the biggest challenges, and bringing a level of empathy and understanding. Again, meeting people where they're at. Very early in my career, I got elected mayor of the small city called St. Joseph, Minnesota, when I was 22, and I came in with all these ideas, and I was going to change Main Street. We're going to revolutionize the town-gown relations, the relationship between the college students and the people who've lived there for 150 years. And probably about 6 months in, the city attorney pulled me aside and said, the city administrator's thinking about quitting, because I came in with so much force and I just didn't understand that, if you call yourself a leader but nobody's following you, you're just walking in the park, right? And that's exactly what was happening. I didn't understand that just because I got an election certificate and I was sworn in, didn't mean that the city staff was going to follow me. They wanted me to spend time with them, understanding how they've done things for sometimes 2 or 3 decades, and present my case and let them know in a genuine way why I thought we should try something differently for the first time. And so that lesson of really understanding the importance of meeting people where they're at, and trying to develop a relationship from that point moving forward, trying to create a common vision that we all can walk toward, was a really big lesson early on.
For me, I come from a culture that has extremely high expectations, so I knew that as a youth leader, I'd have to engage with people that did come from different backgrounds and were disadvantaged, unfortunately. So through engaging with different perspectives and people from all across the world, I was able to gain more initiative and to really focus on the common goal for all of us.
Wonderful. So our last question comes from Hannah. Who provided you radical hospitality or radical inclusion? How do you lean on your community to sustain you and your work?
Well, I'll jump out there because I have, there have been a set of Black women who have empowered opportunity for me in ways that I never thought that I would ever, they're opportunities that I just never imagined. And they saw things in me that I didn't see in myself, and gave me space to be able to try new things, to be able to fail, gave me the support to pick me back up when I fell down, and gave me a vision to be able to say that that I actually deserve to be there. And it changed my life.
Wonderful.
Yeah. In my experience, there are 3 people that, first of all, Hannah, I love the question, thank you. Evan Wolfson, who is the founder of the Freedom to Marry movement, provided me with so much, and there's this old adage that, we all in this work, whether it's environmental justice, social justice, civil rights, we are all standing on the shoulders of giants, and Evan Wolfson is a giant on whose shoulders I do stand. His colleague, Thalia Zapatos, it's a woman who is a force of nature, and You should get to know her. She's working a lot in environmental justice today out in the Northwest of the United States. And then one woman who's passed, her name's Ann Kana Roth, civil rights hero and icon in Minnesota, but somebody who always championed me and showed me that radical hospitality.
Wonderful. Who do you lean on in your community to sustain you in your work? Or, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think some of the greatest people that impacted my life were coaches. My father could tell me something, and I could hear him, and I wasn't the most obedient son. But a coach could say the exact same thing, and it made sense. Like, be in this house before 12 o'clock because nothing happens after 12. Be in this house. And I thought that he was just saying, you know, he wants to retire and all that. And a coach would say, be at practice at 10 o'clock, and if you're late, you're not on the team, and I would be there. So I think that it's the discipline from the person. And so I think, even now, as the different things that I've done, whether it's at the university, or the church, or whatever it might be, it's the discipline from the different boards that would keep me in check, and learning how to take that discipline and then channel it from those that really care about what it is that we commonly want to achieve. But I think initially it came from coaches putting down. I look at Coach Krzyzewski, what is that, Duke?
Yeah.
Coach K, he can take some kids that are coming from tough backgrounds and put a certain discipline around them and bring home championships. So I think that it's the way that those in my life that have influenced me, certainly Martin, you know, certainly Andy. Andy's 90, I'm 80. But he was 28 when I met him, and he would say things of CT, and I would hear them, and at that time it did not make sense. But it's kind of like what Will Rogers said, the older I get, the smarter my parents were. And it's that kind of thing, that kind of discipline that keeps me in check even now. That would be my response to that question, Hannah.
Do you want to add anything? No? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for the wonderful questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them, but please join me again in giving this wonderful panel a round of applause.